Hello, fellow Shakespeareans! It's another V-neck and another episode of SONGspeare 2020. This time it's Cymbeline.
Cymbeline.
Cymbeline includes two songs in the play. The first one is Hark, Hark, the Lark in Act 2, Scene 3. It's sung by either Clotton or musicians that he hired outside Imogen's bedchamber. By the way, I'm going to say Imogen instead of Imogen. I know most people probably say Imogen, but the Arden, which obviously I like to read Ardens, makes a pretty convincing case that the original name or the intended name was Imogen with two N's and that those two N's were mistaken as an M. Doesn't really matter. Anyway, Hark, Hark, the Lark is sung outside Imogen's bedchamber. It's a little bit like Who is Sylvia in Two Gentlemen of Verona, except Sylvia actually responds to that song. In this case, Imogen just sort of doesn't ever mention it.
Wah wah.
For those of you who like to know whether or not there's a historical precedent for these songs, there is for Hark, Hark, the Lark, there is not for the other song. So if you look up the Duffin Shakespeare's Songbook album, you will find it there. I will put a link to that YouTube video right down here. One very well-known setting of the song that's been recorded a bunch is Franz Schubert's Hark, Hark, the Lark, or Hark, Hark, die Lark in German. It is originally in German, based on a translation of Shakespeare. Like most of Schubert's songs, it's pretty good, but I didn't want to record it because nobody needs me to record one other version of it. So go find it, it's great, you can find some very great singers singing it. But speaking of Schubert, we will get a couple other originally German settings of the same text, which I would assume Schubert inspired. They both come after Schubert, and those composers only set Hark, Hark, the Lark, not the other song in this play. The second song in Cymbeline is the very famous words, "Fear no more the heat of the sun." Now this is known as a poem, it's known as a song. Different productions do things differently. It's from Act 4, Scene 2, and is a funeral dirge for Imogen in disguise, when they believe that she is dead after she's taken sleep drugs that make you seem dead. Those show up a lot in Shakespeare. The text has inspired many composers. Some are rather well known. Roger Quilter, who most of his Shakespeare settings are pretty well known. I tend not to sing them here because I don't love all of them, but also you can find them all over the place. Roger Quilter, Shakespeare songs, go listen to Fear No More, The Heat of the Sun. I was pretty tempted for this one. The other one that you should be aware of is Gerald Finzi's. It's gorgeous, but it's also pretty popular. In fact, if you like Shakespeare and you like art song, you should be aware of Gerald Finzi's song cycle, Let Us Garlands Bring. It's great. It includes Shakespeare settings from different plays. It's fantastic, and if I could, I would record all of them, but it's just been recorded by other people. Now, the fact that I had a bunch of funeral dirges to choose from means I need to make a little bit of a confession. I love ballads. I love ballads. I love songs that make people cry. I love songs that make people think. I tend to have sort of a frowny face anyway when I open my mouth to sing, so it just works a lot better when songs are like really serious and slow and methodical. For some of you who may have been keeping track, the episodes so far of SONGspeare 2020 have been getting progressively longer. That's not by design, that's not on purpose. I'm not working up toward a feature-length film that's just me singing Shakespeare songs. However, this episode will be the longest because I decided to feature three, funeral dirges, basically. They're slow, they take a long time, they're so gorgeous, and they're not very well known. To balance out three funeral dirges, I decided to also do three versions of Hark, Hark, the Lark, which I'm going to intersperse, like a double-decker sandwich that also has toppings on the top because it's 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3. It's basically like an open-faced double-decker sandwich. You could eat a sandwich like that. One caveat, I decided to sing everything in English even though some of the pieces were originally published in German by German-speaking composers. Ich könnte auf Deutsch singen, aber mein Publikum spricht Englisch. Wow, what a show-off. Way to put the douche in Deutsch. When I replaced English over the German text, I just used the Arden text, so if there are differences between the words that you expect from different versions of Shakespeare, that might be why. One thing in Hark, Hark, the Lark, instead of with everything that pretty been, the Arden suggests that you could also just use the word is, and it might be correct. So I just say, with everything that pretty is, because that's how we talk. Why not understand words? Yay! When a piece was published in English, I just used the words that are in that text. It could be whatever, I'm just honoring what the composer thought the words were in that context. So without any further ado, let's get this funeral dirge rolling. I didn't really mean to do it this way, but it turns out we're kind of going in chronological order. Sort of. Following in the steps of Schubert, possibly, our first piece is Hark, Hark the Lark by Karl Friedrich Curschmann, who lived from 1805 to 1841. Yay, editing. Which means he was sort of a contemporary of Schubert, although he was a teenager when Schubert died. Curschmann was pretty popular as a songwriter in the days after Schubert, but Schubert's popularity and the quality of his songs sort of just overshadowed everyone who wasn't Schubert, especially around that time. So there are actually a lot of German composers who wrote good art songs, but just haven't been remembered as well as Schubert because people love Schubert so much because Schubert did so much to define the art song. Still, I really liked the style of Curschmann's setting. It's sort of late classical and shows the bridge into romantic music, and as I talked about in the last episode, I don't want to completely favor romantic or 20th century song. I like the cleanness of that kind of post-Mozart, post-Haydn, but not quite into Schubert's stormier songs. That musical style of early music, I like having that as sort of a palate cleanser from all of the blusteriness of the romantic art song that we've been hearing. So here is Karl Friedrich Curschmann's setting of Hark, Hark the Lark.
Hark, 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 the lark at Anne's gate sings, and fever skins our eyes. His steeds to water at the springs, on chaliced flowers that lies, and winking merry buds begin to ope their golden eyes with everything that pretty is, with everything that pretty is. My lady sweet, my lady sweet, my lady sweet, arise, with everything that pretty is, with everything that pretty is. My lady sweet, my lady sweet, my lady sweet, arise. Arise. Arise, arise.
Our first setting of Fear No More the Heat of the Sun is by sort of an opposite of Handel, years and years later. Handel was a German composer who had some success in Germany, but then moved to England and his popularity exploded, and that's where he decided to make the rest of his musical career. Henry Hugo Pierson was an English-born composer who didn't have a ton of success in England, but moved to Germany, and Germans loved his music. He lived from 1815 to 1873, so smack in the middle of the 19th century. He was actually born as Henry Hugh Pierson, and when he emigrated, he changed his name, or stylized his name, into the German Henry Hugo instead of Hugh. Pierson spelled it differently so that German pronunciation rules would be the same name. I don't know a lot more about him because he's not a very well-known composer, but I think from this setting you'll see that he knew what he was doing. This is the longest setting of Fear No More the Heat of the Sun. Each verse has two main musical sections. One is in 4/4 time, one is in 6/8 time, and then at the end we have this sort of prayer-like reflection. I think the time is worth it. Hopefully you'll agree.
Ghost unlaid for thee, nothing ill come near quiet consummation have, and renowned be.
Our second setting of Hark, Hark the Lark is a little forward in time and still in the German-speaking world. This time it's by a female Austrian composer, Mathilde Kralik. She was born to a fairly wealthy family. Her brother was actually a somewhat well-known poet and philosopher and historian or art curator, I don't know. Mathilde Kralik was actually a student of Anton Bruckner at one point, among others, and she studied at the conservatory, and she was a pretty established musician. She had popularity in the Austrian concert music scene in the later 19th century. So the fact that we haven't remembered her very well is pretty much our fault, not their fault. She had performances, and people knew her music, people knew who she was, and we have just sort of forgotten. She was also apparently quite a pianist, and you can tell that from her piano accompaniment, which I could not play. So I am very happy to have Cindy Lindeen-Martin join me again to tackle Mathilde Kralik's setting of Hark, Hark the Lark, which originally was Herr, Herr, die Lerch, and I have put the English words on top of.
Hark, hark, the lark at heaven's gate sings, and Phoebus gives arise his steeds to water at those springs on childish flowers that lies, and winking merry parts begin to ope their golden eyes. Everything that pretty is, my lady sweet, arise, arise, my lady sweet, arise, 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 my lady sweet, arise, my lady sweet, arise.
Our second setting of Fear No More, The Heat of the Sun is by Mervyn Horder, who we've heard from him before, but I didn't actually realize that he was a baron and he lived from 1910 to 1997. So this is the only composer on this episode who was alive when I was alive, so that's cool. His setting saves a little time by leaving out the third verse, which is kind of sad because I like that lyric. Thunder crash, lightning stone! But he does save a little time that way. I have struggled to come up with the words to describe why I like his setting so much, but it's a little bit more updated. It feels more 20th century. It's very kind of yearning, and it's very plaintive. That's not the word, but I'll let you figure it out.
Fear no more the heat of the sun, nor the furious winter's rages. Thou thy worldly task hast done, but gone and tamed thy wages. Golden lads and girls all must, as chimney sweepers, come to dust. Fear no more the frown of the great. Thou art past the tyrant's stroke, care no more to clothe and knit. To thee the seed is as the oak, the sceptre burning physic must all
The final setting of Hark, Hark the Lark is by an American composer, Harvey Worthington Loomis. He lived from 1865 to 1930, so backing up from Mervyn Horder a little bit, but still late 19th century into the 20th century. He studied at the National Conservatory in New York under Antonin Dvorak, so a little connection there. His setting has a very pastoral feel. It kind of feels like there's just two flutes maybe playing this little thirds line out in the wilderness. When the vocalist is singing, the piano texture is this little kind of brum, brum, so it's sort of harp-like. It's instruments of the field or sort of folk instruments, things that people might have in a barn. I doubt that's what he really was going for, but that's how I'm going to describe it. Here it is.
Hark, hark, the lark at heaven's gate sings, and Phoebus skins our eyes. His steeds to water at those springs, on chaliced flowers that rise. And winking merry buds begin to ope their golden eyes, with everything that pretty been, my lady sweet our eyes, with everything that pretty been, my lady sweet our eyes. Our eyes, our eyes.
The final setting of Fear No More, The Heat of the Sun is by Hubert Parry, who is also becoming, like Mervyn Horder, a go-to for these episodes. I like his music. I really didn't know his music before this, and it's great. Interestingly enough, Henry Hugo Pierson was a teacher briefly of Hubert Parry, so there's a little bit of a lineage there. Hubert Parry lived from 1848 to 1918, and as a teacher of Vaughan Williams, you can kind of see that he was part of the British transition from the 19th into the 20th century. Not incredibly dissonant. It's not highly experimental music. It's not as modal as Ralph Vaughan Williams would take his music, but it is very much in a sort of dramatic or very highly text painted and very textural art song tradition. So that's a little bit about Hubert Parry. You've heard a lot from him. You're probably going to hear a lot from him in the future, but I figured I'd say a little more about him while I'm being more biographical in this episode. I think the thing that I like about his setting of this text so much is that it is pretty ooey gooey. It's very romantic, it's very sort of touchy-feely. He uses silences effectively and sort of has the piano drop out while the singer is just singing alone. It's a little bit less drawing room, more of a closed musical and emotional environment, if that makes sense. So here's Hubert Parry's setting of Fear No More, The Heat of the Sun, rounding off this hopefully not half-hour episode of SONGspeare 2020.
Master and goes almost as chimney sweepers come to dust. Fear no more the frown of the great. Thou art past the tyrant's stroke. Can no more to clothe and eat. To thee the reed is as the oak. The scepter, learning, physic, must all follow this and come to dust. Fear no more the lightning flash, nor the all-dreaded thunderstorm. Fear not slander, censure, rush. Thou hast fished joy and moan. All lovers young, all lovers must consign to thee and come to dust.
So, there you have it. 3 songs about birds and 3 songs about a dead person. If you would like to collaborate with me on these episodes, if you're a guitarist, classical guitarist probably, harpist, accordionist, organist, I don't care. I may have something for you. I would love to be a little more experimental and get more faces into these episodes, so let me know if you are interested in that sort of thing. As usual, if you liked it, thumbs up. If you hated it, thumbs down. If you have things to say about it, you can either find me on social media where I might post these episodes or write them right in the comments down below. If you want to see future episodes, subscribe to my YouTube channel. That is episode 4 of SONGspeare 2020. Keep reading, keep following along. If you are following along with Shakespeare 2020 that inspired this whole series, we have something of a gauntlet coming up. There's a tiny bit of a musical break for King Lear and some of the poems, but then we have Passionate Pilgrim, A Midsummer Night's Dream, we have The Merchant of Venice, we have Much Ado About Nothing, and we have As You Like It. All 5 of those things have musical settings, and they go boom, 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 boom between July 3rd and August 3rd. So 5 episodes in 4 weeks, basically, that have to happen. Can he do it? Stay tuned.